Greetings, everyone. Jason Wheeler here, one of the pastors at North Park Church here in Columbus, Nebraska, and very grateful to be bringing your life group lesson to you again this week. And we're taking a little break, a 1-week break from our Samson series, and we're going to talk about prodigal versus prudent living, which are both two paths to die on, depending on how heavily you are leaning on them to save you. So we're talking about the prodigal son today. Luke 15, verses 11 through 32. Quite a few verses here, more than we typically have for our life group. And I attempted to kind of cut it down, edit it some, and that just wasn't working in my mind, in my heart. So I'm going to go ahead and read this to you, read all of these verses to you. And you guys just be in your Bibles or have your outlines in front of you there. Follow along as I'm reading it. And then we will get into some discussion questions. So again, Luke 15, verses 11 through 32, and this is the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal son. And he said, and this is of course Jesus telling this story, and he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that's coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had, and he took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he'd spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went, and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. And as he came and he drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants, and he asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he's received him back, safe and sound. But he was angry. Older brother was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, look, these many years I've served you. I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. So great story. There's a lot in there. To start with, to kick things off. Question 1, an oldie but a goodie. Who do you relate to most in our story and why? Several characters in there. There's some brothers in there. There's a father in there, some servants in there. Pigs in there. So pray about that and talk about that in your group. Who do you relate to most in our story and why? Do that now. Okay, on to question 2. A 2-parter here. We've got the younger son, we've got the older son. So part A of question 2. Initially, what was the younger son's salvation? What was he leaning on to comfort his heart, bring joy to his heart? bring peace to his heart, bring validity to his heart. What initially was the younger brother leaning on as the salvation of his heart? Talk about that now. Okay, and B, what was the older son's salvation? What was he leaning on to make life worth living, to comfort himself, to bring peace to himself, to bring worth to himself? What was the older brother's salvation? Talk about that now. Okay, so they both the older and the brother son, have their own methods of saving themselves. The younger brother, he was just going to do his own thing. He was going to have fun, entertainment. He was not going to be restrained by the conventional rules of whatever upbringing he had come from. He was going to go out, be his own man, have a good time. That was going to make his life worth living. That was going to save him. The older brother, on the other hand, his salvation was doing the right thing. He was going to do what he was expected to do. You adhere to the rules, you pull your weight, and you can expect that things are going to turn out a certain way. That's what the older brother was believing in. That was his salvation. And to be honest, we should all be able to relate to some extent to both of them. You know, many people like to relate to the prodigal son. Usually that's what we're focused on, the younger son, when we talk about this story. And people kind of enjoy talking about how they were lost at one point but have run back to the Father. But I think it's important to point out, I was talking with Pastor Ryan recently, and man, he pointed something out to me that's just so true. Rarely does somebody come to the Father, start out as the prodigal, without almost immediately swinging all the way to the older brother. Time and time again, and if you pray about this, you can probably recognize it even in your own heart. You're lost. You're running around trying to figure out how to save yourself, trying to figure out how to have a decent time doing it. And then you run back to the Father. He's calling you. You know you need to go. You run back. And then instantly we tend to find ourselves really putting a lot of effort into doing the right thing in our Christian walk and expecting that means things are supposed to go a certain way. So it's important that we're praying about how to find ourselves in both of these characters. Now, moving on to question 3. Again, this is a two-parter. We're going to start with part A right here, and I'll give you a little bit of time to talk about that, and then we'll move on into part B. Psalm 36:2 says, "For he flatters himself in his own eyes, that his iniquity cannot be found out and hated." So this is a person who's so busy being impressed with themselves and thinking about their awesome works and how talented they are, flattering themselves so much in their own eyes that they can't even see the sin in themselves. Maybe everybody around them can see it, but they personally cannot. So, bearing that in mind, Psalm 36, verse 2, part A of question 3, where can we see self-flattery in our story? Pray about that and talk about that now. Okay, so if we look at verse 29 here, you've got the older brother, father is just elated the younger son has come home, and rightly so. And he's come home with the right heart. Younger son came home not expecting a party, not feeling entitled to anything, just needed the father. And of course, as it should, that makes the father extremely happy. But older son isn't having this. And look at what he says here at verse 29. "Look, these many years I've served you. I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends." He thinks pretty highly of himself, doesn't he? And granted, I'm sure he's put a lot of effort into what he's done. But in his mind, he deserves the world. He doesn't even see anything wrong with his actions. Is not even remotely grateful that his brother is home, alive, does not see his heart issues because he's too busy flattering himself in his own eyes. So, part B of question 3. Give one example of that from your own life, where you have you've struggled with, been able to flatter yourself enough in your own eyes to overlook the log that's hanging out of it. Pray about that and talk about that now. Okay, question 4. Another two-parter. I know. It's a lesson full of two-parters today. Part A, the question is, where do we, in our story, see an example of coming to the end of yourself? And that's what happens to each and every one of us that truly comes to Christ, right? Not just some shallow faith or just some prayer that's supposed to save us and then we continue just doing whatever we want to do. No, actually coming to the end of ourselves, which means we realize that our methods just absolutely will not work, and anything that I touch gets twisted up, regardless of how badly I want to do the right thing, right? You come to the end of yourself. God's backed you into a corner. Where do we see an example of that in our story? Talk about that now, and then we will get to part B. Okay, so verse 17, right? We see the younger brother here. He says, when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but here I perish with hunger? I'll go to my father and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. See, he's come to the end of himself. If circumstances have beat him down, his methods have done nothing but put him in the pigsty, and he's aware of who he has sinned against. He has come to the end of himself. Part B, getting a little bit more personal. Pray about this. Be willing to be honest. Be willing to be transparent. Be willing to be vulnerable. Put yourself out there. What has that looked like in your own life? Talk about that now. Okay, so just to drive it home, question 5 and 6 here. We're gonna go the other direction. Instead of breaking one question up into 2, we're gonna put 2 into 1 here real quick. We had talked about the younger brother, his salvation being his own man, having a good time, and the older brother, his salvation being prudent, being responsible, doing the right thing. Both of those guys had different things that they were trying to use to accomplish the same goal, which is save them, save their heart, give them peace, give them worth. Question 5, what are you trying to make work as the salvation of your heart right now? And then question 6, what are you going to take away from life group this week that will help you with that you can apply to the situation? So what are you trying to make work as the salvation of your heart right now? And obviously, the church answer is Jesus. And I'm not saying that you're not doing that. Discuss that. But just be willing to discuss any other things that might be idols or bordering on idols in your life. And then what are you taking away from your group this week? All right, that's it. I hope you had a good time. I hope you guys are praying for each other out there. I'm praying for you, and I'll be back with you next week. All right, bye.